I'm John West. I'm the Midwest agronomist for Ceres Imaging, based really out of my home in Abilene, Kansas, or south of Abilene, Kansas, on the farm. And I don't know, work Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Colorado, even down into New Mexico and Arizona, West Texas. But anyway, we just really wanted an opportunity to kind of engage with the TAPS participants. My apologies here. What I've got up on the screen is the Oklahoma State TAPS field. We've also got obviously the University of Nebraska TAPS field as well. What I'm going to do is just kind of briefly introduce the application, in case you want to log in and kind of see what your team's plot, how it's performing at least via the imagery. So yeah, just kind of a brief overview of how to navigate the app and things like that. So anyway, as I said, this is the Oklahoma State TAPS, and right up in here. So the cool thing about our application is whether you're on desktop or mobile, we do have a mobile app. So if you log into the iOS or Apple App Store, you'll find it under Ceres Imaging. Also, the Google Play Store, just search Ceres Imaging, and you'll be able to find that. I should say this too. So, in working with Jason Warren, I'm not sure we have just kind of a general login, but we'll be getting that out to you guys. Honestly, I was going to say that too. Sarah's really the star of the show here today. She's the one doing the kind of the magic behind the scenes, and once I kind of finish up with the app overview here, she'll take over and talk about some of the things she's running. I guess as far as analytics on the backside to help the teams in the competition throughout the growing season here. But so anyway, as I said, pretty much looks the same on the desktop or laptop as it does the mobile apps. But this guy here in the upper left-hand corner, we call this the hamburger. Technically, it's the toggle drawer. But one thing that we've done this year is we've gotten the boundaries of the TAPS plots. So you had the opportunity to turn that layer on, so you can see where the plots lie in relation to the field. Again, I'll show the UNL TAPS field as well, but obviously here's the plots. And I'll just jump into the different image dates and image layers here. So here in the lower left-hand corner, obviously we have some images from last year, but we started imaging this field on April 23rd. So you had the opportunity to see that. I'm not sure why those are there, but I'll throw them away. So April 23rd, 1st of June, and then the latest image is 6/15. I think these are actually set to fly probably beginning of next week again. So, and then the image layers. So everything really starts with core infrared. That's how we produce, NDVI, our chlorophyll layer, as well as the water stress. One thing of note is, like in this field and in the UNL TAPS field, there's a portion of it that's sorghum, and that's what you see here in the center portion of this field is it's planted to sorghum. So we're not getting much infrared light being reflected off the plants. There's not enough vegetation. But anyway, it all starts with the core infrared. Again, that's how we make our chlorophyll and our NDVI layers. The cool thing about chlorophyll, I'll go ahead and jump into that. The cool thing about chlorophyll is that we're actually capturing the red edge band. NDVI itself is really, it's 40 to 50-year-old technology. It's more of an algorithm of just shows plant vigor. A lot of times when corn reaches, say, V8 and beyond, NDVI tends to saturate, and you lose a lot of the variability that exists in the field. With the chlorophyll layer, again, we're capturing red edge, and red edge gives us more of an idea of what's actually going on in the leaf, how that plant's performing, how well it's turning, sunlight, water, and nutrients into carbohydrates and grain. So, like I said, a lot of times the variability disappears in NDVI, whereas the chlorophyll, we can still really get a good idea of how those plants are performing. Um, One thing to point out here too is um, I know in this field here, like plots 18 and 19, Sarah can give me a better explanation, but I know um, one of these is no nitrogen and no water, and the other one is, what is it? Gets water but no still no nitrogen, but it's getting some water. Is that correct?
Farm number 19 has no nitrogen and no water. And farm number 18, those are the plots for no water but high nitrogen. And we're really able to pick out in these first flight dates that there's a really pronounced water effect, even more so than the nitrogen effect, where those two farms, 18 and 19, really pop out in many of the image layers.
Yep. And so I probably jumped around too much, but I will also go into core thermal, and it's more of a base layer too, that we use it to build other things. So the core thermal is um, an important piece of what we call our water stress layer. Um, and really, again, what we're trying to show in the core thermal is how well the pivot's performing. If we've got any plug nozzles, that shows up. If we've got any over applications, they could possibly be going on here, that shows up. But yeah, we usually use this thermal image to see how the pivot's performing itself. This dry area here, maybe I should explain that. So um, the legend is right over here to the right hand side, but if we've got deep dark purples, that generally equals cooler in the thermal image. That generally equals wetter. So if we're getting into these oranges, light yellows, whites, that generally means it's really hot or drier. The cool thing about this image taken on 615 is that prior to this last weekend, we were really experiencing a lot of hot, dry winds in the high plains from the Texas Panhandle or West Texas up into eastern Colorado, and I assume even western Nebraska. So we were really getting dry out in front of the pivot. So now I'll jump into what we call water stress. And again, it's used to really highlight how that pivot's performing. Over here on the east side of this pivot, I know Dr. Warren is doing some variable rate irrigation studies. So there's also some varying application rates of nitrogen. I want to say it's repeated 3 times across the corn here. Again, here in the center, it's sorghum. But again, we get a really good idea of the application that's occurring. And again, this is some VRI pie pieces that you're seeing that's happening here. But as Sarah mentioned too, here in these plots that are numbered 18, 19, you can obviously see how the no water is affecting those plots. So now I think probably, well, I'll say this too. I don't know if you'll ever be in the TAPS field, but we've got a little GPS beacon here. It gives you an opportunity to, if you're ever in the field or in any of your fields that we image, it'll follow you around so you can see where you're at, in the field in relation to the image. You've always got the opportunity to drop pins and leave notes. Here I can kind of show you that. So you got the opportunity to drop a pin, call it a note, call it an issue, a soil sample point, that sort of thing. I need to get my face out of the way here. But like under issues, you got the opportunity to mark it. If you're working with an agronomist, something like that, they've got the opportunity to mark it as a irrigation issue, weed issue, insects, whatever that might be. Maybe I'll just go ahead and save one just for the sake of demonstration. But yeah, there's the pin, and then obviously you got the opportunity to click on it. You can see the notes left, who left the note, etc. So, but I'll go ahead and throw that away. And then let's see, I'll go ahead and jump over here to University of Nebraska TAPS, because Sarah and I were looking at this earlier and seeing some cool stuff. again, we've got the, I'll go ahead and switch to infrared here, but under the hamburger, we can turn on the, oops, I need to zoom to the field. Under the hamburger here, we can turn on um, the plot layers or the plot boundaries. Um, we are working to get the team numbers laid out here, like we have in the Oklahoma State trial. We at least got the boundaries defined. And there's some interesting things that show up here too, especially in the water stress. So you can see kind of how some different teams are managing water. Obviously, these guys have gotten quite a bit of water on already. This is the water stress layer. Pretty wet right here, as opposed to this one here. I'm not going to say it's getting dry. Maybe I should explain that here on the legend. Again, it looks like thermal from warmest to coolest. But what we really like to see is you know, the field being living in this dark blue to green. If we get into purples, we're probably getting a little too much water on. But also, I mean, obviously it's western Nebraska, even clear into Texas. We haven't had a lot of moisture, so I understand trying to bank water, so to speak, in the soil profile before that corn starts using 25, 30, 25 to 30 hundredths of moisture a day. So obviously early, there's going to be times of over application again, just to kind of bank that water in the profile. But um, I was going to say the other thing that we can kind of do here, and this was something do overlay, and I'll overlay this with chlorophyll. But obviously, there's some varying degrees of I don't know if I should say plant vigor, but or plant health, so to speak. Obviously, we've got some of these plots that are. Sarah, I should reverse that just because the way the plots show up, like I had it earlier. There we go.
Worth just mentioning why only part of the field is displayed right now in this view?
Yeah, I can do that too. So the white in what you're seeing here, so we try to mask bare soil. And really the way we do that is everything that has an NDVI value of a 0.3 or less, it just gets masked out. So, I mean, obviously you can get some soil reflection that can mess with the imagery, so to speak, mess with the data. So we do our best to mask that out. And it shows as white in the chlorophyll layer. Obviously, it shows as black in the water stress layer. But what I really wanted to, kind of point out here is, this is here on the left side, we're looking at water. And then if I scroll back over, you can also see, kind of how vigorous the plants are acting in each one of these blocks. I mean, these two blocks really kind of stick out too, because this one's gotten water, but obviously this one's gotten more, and it's showing quite a bit more plant health and vigor, so to speak. And then obviously we've got this guy here that shows really dark blue, so really looks like this team is done some early watering, and it really kind of shows there in that water stress image. But let's see, is there anything else I should mention here? Obviously, we do deliver an RGB image. It's generally not our highest resolution image, but it is there. I generally don't look at it much. I generally look at infrared. The one thing about imagery is to get value out of it, you got to use it during the season. And I guess my other take home is that a lot of times it takes multiple layers to really tell the story. So again, I generally lean on color infrared, chlorophyll. Let me try to lay that side by side too, with the do chlorophyll and NDVI. This just kind of highlights the difference in chlorophyll and NDVI. A lot of times, we'll actually see more vigor in NDVI than we're getting in chlorophyll. But actually, in these plots, being early season, I assume when this was taken, this corn's probably in the V4 V5 range. I'm not quite sure, but um, the chlorophyll actually does a nicer job of highlighting the vigorous areas as opposed to the NDVI. So um, it's
The
quite.
spectral index that we're using for the chlorophyll layer 2, that does a much better job adjusting for any background noise from the soil than what you're able to get with NDVI. So that might be another reason that we're seeing more variation in the chlorophyll index. And that chlorophyll layer is really my personal favorite too. I've found that for at least corn and soybean that I've worked with the past year or two, that early season and mid-season chlorophyll often maps really nicely to yield later in the season.
Yep. Especially, that's the cool thing about imagery is, especially if you're yield mapping. Um, Generally V6, V7, the corn does a really nice job of revealing an early season yield map. Um, I won't say always, but most generally, that V6, V7 image will correlate very closely to your final yield. Once corn reaches V8 and beyond, hits those rapid growth stages and, is really jumping, that tends to go away. But as we get into, once the black or starch line starts coming down and the crop starts to senesce, you'll also see that that yield map tends to come back. Your higher yielding areas will show a little bit more vigorous, more green. The lower yielding areas will be further, just further matured, closer to block layer, that sort of thing. Your higher yielding areas are generally just a little bit slower um, than the lower yielding areas. So, and I was going to say this too. I was going to switch over here. This water stress layer is really what sets us apart in the marketplace. I don't believe there's anybody else really looking at anything like this, at least from an aerial perspective. But what we really try to do here is I don't know if I should present this slide with everything going on here. Hopefully I can get out of it pretty easily. But again, it really lends itself well to seeing how the application uniformity is across the pivot, more so than just the thermal. Because obviously we're getting a little under application here on the right hand side in this second pivot span, and I actually see this quite often. Things aren't quite nozzled correctly. Obviously, I know getting things shut down enough in these first two spans can be pretty difficult to keep them from overwatering. Um, so they're probably the hardest two spans to nozzle. But again, we're looking for nozzle issues, but also just how uniform the application is across the entire pivot. Um, and just to talk about the thermal cameras a little bit, they're pretty sensitive. We can detect change up to 0.1 degrees Celsius. And we do adjust things for ambient conditions. So every one of these is adjusted, not quite at the field level, but we use localized weather data to kind of help normalize the image. And again, this talks about masking bare soil, but we also have some proprietary crop models. We work a lot in trees and vines, also row crops. So the algorithms change a little bit just due to crop type. But let me hit escape here, get out of that. But anyway, with that, Ken, if you got any questions, please feel free to type in the chat, or we might actually unmute things here at the end, because it looks like we just got yourself with us here, so that's cool. But I'll go ahead and turn things over to Sarah, and obviously, Sarah, if you got anything you want me to cover as we get finished up here, I'll be glad to do it.
Another thing that's worth showing while you have this up, if you switch over to the thermal layer again,
Sure.
for folks who might be a little bit less familiar looking at imagery, I think it's just worth pointing out that you can see that the pivot has started to run already on this particular flight date, and that's what you're seeing, the darker purple up on the north end of the field is where the pivot has recently watered. And
Let's see if I switch to Oklahoma. probably get a better idea of that. Yeah, so let's go here. So yeah, like as Sarah was describing, obviously out here in front of the pivot, it's been really hot, dry winds, so it's really dry out in front of the pivot, has been lately. And I think in this little divot here, I think pretty sure Jason's actually got nozzle by nozzle control on this pivot, and this is a Bear trial for Bear chemical. But anyway, you're kind of seeing that. Really nice, really nice. Oops, really nice soil signature, so we can see what the pivot's doing there. So I would say later season we get more of a signature from the crop. It's a little bit easier to see the stress that's occurring in the crop, but it's also nice to get this early season soil signature again, just in looking at application uniformity. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hand things to Sarah.
All right, thanks, John. Let me share my screen now and go over some of the in-season summaries. All right, so TAPS participants can get access to in-season summaries to see how their plot is performing compared with other teams by registering through a survey that I sent out. Many of you have probably seen this or maybe registered yourself, but the survey looks like this. It's just asking that participants let me know, what their name is and what competition they're participating in, so we can make sure to set up the right image access to you. And then once you register, you'll get a link through email to access some summary figures in a Google Drive. And I'll pull up the example link for the Oklahoma State Corn project or competition. So this link will bring you to a Google Drive that has data for each of the teams and then some summaries of the field overall for different flight dates. And you can navigate through some of these folders to view different types of summaries. Like here on the right, we'll be looking at some images of the average temperature per plot and other sections of the field. The figures on the left are going to be showing more average NDVI or chlorophyll per plot. And what's cool is that you can either navigate to the summary for your particular farm or team number, or if you want, you can actually go and download the entire set of data to your computer. And you would download that just by pulling down this last menu bar, either for the OSU TAPS corn or for whichever competition your team is participating in, and click that download button. I actually really prefer looking at these files on my computer, so I'll show you some of these summaries from my download folder. So when it downloads, you'll have folders for each of the farms and the field summaries, just like your view is in the Google Drive. And it can be interesting to look at these summaries side by side, summary and the actual image up together. So here we're looking at the average NDVI per plot in the OSU corn experiment from June 15th. And I'll switch in the app to look at that same image. So here I'm selecting colorized NDVI on the left. And I'm going to go into the menu bar to overlay where the plots are. And just as John was showing earlier, there's certain plots that really jump out. You see, for instance, these two on the western side look really red. And when we look over in the average summary, you can see that these also have probably the lowest NDVI of the whole field. And those correspond with farms 18 and 19, which are actually some of the no water, low water checks in the field. So at least at this stage in the season, we're getting a really strong water response in the TAPS field. Another type of interesting summary we might want to look at is kind of a side-by-side comparison of how each of the farms are performing. So in your downloads, under that field summary folder, there's going to be some files named team comparison. And when you open those up, this will actually show you the average NDVI of each, for each team. So the way these competitions are set up, each team has 3 different plots in different sections of the field. And we're looking at the average of those 3 plots separately for each team. So the average of all of the plots in this whole field is about 0.41. And we can see that, this early in the season, most of the plots and most of the teams are performing similarly. You might have a high around 0.44, 0.45 and a low around maybe 0.37, but this early in the season, those plots are actually fairly similar to each other, especially the guys here in the middle. What we do see as being very different are, again, some of those control plots, farm 19 and farm 18. I have a little cheat sheet available, or just on my webinar notes, a list of what the controls are used in this field. So farm 19 and 18, those were the no water. And you see that even though farm 18 has more nitrogen applied, that really these two farm numbers or team numbers are having similarly low NDVI values. What's also interesting to look at are these nitrogen checks. So farms 15 and 16 have high amounts of water, but vary in how much nitrogen they're having. So farm 15 here, I guess I wonder if I wrote these wrong or if it's just too early in the season to see a real nitrogen effect. But according to this figure, high nitrogen and high water has relatively low average NDVI. So that could just be because there's a lot of variation in the field starting out. Plants that maybe are on a slightly different soil type and a bit warmer emerge quicker and have slightly more NDVI in these initial flights. So I imagine that we'll see these checks changing later in the season. I'll pull up now maybe the summary of temperature. So on the left here, now we're looking at that core thermal layer again. I like to think of this as the canopy temperature of each plot, where it's lighter, those plots are warmer, and that could indicate that there's more bare soil underneath. In some ways, this canopy temperature can also mimic differences in vegetation or photosynthetic capacity among different plots. In the summary, I could pull up both the team summary, looking at the average temperature per plot. It looks like my title got cut off there a little bit. and also maybe the team summary. Oops. Team summary for temperature, which actually maybe I'm remembering now I don't have the bar plots for temperature, but looking at the average temperature per plot can also be insightful. Here the number is degrees Fahrenheit, different from the average of all of the plots. So you have plots, warmer plots, maybe 3 degrees warmer than average, and cooler plots, which are probably the same ones that have higher NDVI, higher chlorophyll, and lower water stress, as having 3 or 4 degrees cooler than the rest of the plot on average. I might switch over to show some of the summaries from the UNL tabs. So I'll start by pulling up UNL tabs on my view in the app. And I'm going to select the sprinkler competition field, the one on the right. The SDI corn, we're also imaging for that competition, although we haven't talked about it. That's this field here in the left. But zooming in on the sprinkler corn, overlaying the corn plots, and maybe pulling up the chlorophyll layer that we were looking at earlier. Now I'm going to pull up my downloads folder and look at some of those team summaries that that the UNL TAPS folks have access to. So again, I'll start by looking at the field summary and maybe the chlorophyll index from June 16th. And start by looking at the average chlorophyll value per plot. And we can see that there's quite a bit of variation, especially there's a couple of plots here in the north that are actually near an irrigation well that look like they have a little bit more chlorophyll than some of the others, but quite a bit of variation throughout the field, slightly lower in some of these plots with more yellow and red, and slightly more chlorophyll elsewhere. Again, we could look at a summary of how each of the teams are performing. And some of the teams that have lowest average chlorophyll are farms number 28 and 29. And those, I believe, are also a type of either check plot or another experiment that's happening in this field. Since these are quite a bit lower than some of the other fields, we might be interested in learning more about what's happening in those particular plots. And in this Google Drive, there's summaries that are specific for each team. So if you go up a layer in your downloads, you can see that there's separate folders for each of the farm numbers. And if you open one of those up, like farm number 28, which was the lowest, you'll see a couple of figures that are specific for that farm. So this is a nice example where you can see how farm number 28 performs on average and for each of the 3 blocks compared with all of the teams that are participating. So on average, all of the UNL TAPS corn plots have a chlorophyll value of about 0.35 or 0.36, but this underperformer, farm number 28, has a value that's closer to maybe 0.33. And you can see by looking at 3 different reps, if that farm is performing kind of uniformly poor, uniformly good, or if it's specific to one particular plot. So in this case, that low average for farm number 28 seems to be, consistent across most of the sections of the field. It's certainly not performing a whole lot better than the other farms, but in particular in this first rep, farm number 28 has a really low value. It could also be interesting to look at a farm that's doing exceptionally well. So farm number 3 has the highest chlorophyll value. If we go and look at that particular farm and pull up the summary for that guy, we can also get a sense that farm number 3 is overperforming in each of those 3 reps. So on average, it has a chlorophyll value close to 0.39, which is quite a bit higher than the average of all of the plots. And that higher value is pretty consistent across each of the 3 reps, where it's outperforming the rest of the plots, but exceptionally high in plots 2 and 3. As we have more flights, we'll continue to add new summaries for each of the farms and each of the competitions. Right now, since we've only had a few flights that cover the field since there's been good emergence and good vegetative growth, there's only a couple of summary figures here. There's a separate figure for NDVI. Early in the season, we'd expect the patterns for NDVI and chlorophyll to be pretty similar to each other. And that's, what we're seeing here, that same pattern of higher chlorophyll that we saw a minute ago. We're also seeing a very similar pattern with the NDVI. We could switch the image over to also, show that NDVI. My guess is since farm number 3 had the highest average NDVI and also some of the highest plot level values, my guess is that some of the plots belonging to this team might be, one of these corner plots, maybe this guy here in the middle. There's really a handful of plots that seem to be exceptionally vigorous early in the season. So I hope that teams will use these summaries to draw insight on how their management decisions are affecting, affecting the imagery and affecting the plant's vigor and chlorophyll and biomass accumulation in the season. If there's types of figures that are especially useful to teams, I'd love to get feedback on that. My role here at Ceres is largely to provide support for a lot of these research projects that we're running and experiment with different types of displays in row crops. So if you have feedback about things that are really useful or maybe not so useful, I'd love to hear it. There's also summaries, of course, for all of the other competitions that we haven't talked about here today. And those are also available to participants of these competitions who sign up through the survey.